everyone. It's really good to be here with everyone, and this is my first time here at this beautiful campus and location. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's event. My name is Erica Smith, and I'm the Dean of the College at Connecticut College. I'm newer to the college, so this is my first year with One Book, One Region, and it's the 20th year of One Book, One Region. So it is just a pleasure to celebrate here with everyone tonight at this wonderful kickoff event. My first order of business for the evening is to introduce a student who is going to read the land acknowledgement. Sakshi Patel is the student who is an accounting major, a junior. Sakshi is the secretary and treasurer of the Associated Student Government and the Eco Husky Club, the Sailing Club, and a mentor in the first year experience program. She also worked as a head Q tutor at the Academic Center. She's an orientation leader, and she works in the Athletic Center. So please join me in welcoming Sakshi to give us the land acknowledgement.
Good evening, everyone. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the territory of Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Betty Ann Ryder, and I am one of the original One Book, One Region committee members. And I'm here. I'm here tonight to tell you a little bit about this One Book reading project. I know a lot of you have heard it before, but hopefully you'll hear something new. It's hard to believe that it's been 20 years since One Book, One Region was launched. Community reading projects were popping up around the country, and the challenge was raised, why couldn't we do this in our corner of Connecticut? A group of librarians, educators, and community members gathered, and I have to say, on a side, it's gratifying to see that a lot of those original committee members are still with us tonight, so they're scattered in the audience, and it's always great to have them here. Anyway, we came together, and the group took up the challenge and figured out how to make it work with a loose organization, no funding, but lots of enthusiasm. 7 years ago, we expanded our reach when Connecticut College joined the collaboration, adding new dimensions to the program. And here we find ourselves 20 years later, still sifting through piles of books to find the one we want to recommend to our readers throughout the region. We always want to choose a book that you will enjoy reading, but over the years, the books have also been chosen to expand our horizons, spark discussions, and inform us about topics that can be timely, historical, and most often universal. Immigration, the Holocaust, the criminal justice system, coming of age, the opioid epidemic, just to mention some of the subjects we've tackled. We've introduced both well-known and unknown authors, and some who almost fit into both categories. When we chose The Kite Runner by Helene Hosseini, we were the first in the country to focus on this soon-to-become bestseller. Similarly, when David Benioff came to introduce his novel, City of Thieves, he had just arrived back in the US from Ireland, where he was working on a really obscure project, The Game of Thrones. We've sometimes struggled to find and agree on the right book, and other times the winner easily rises to the top of the pile. We're all excited to introduce you to this year's choice. I can't explain why we've never thought to explore this topic before, other than that we were waiting to find the right book and the right author to explain it to us. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Laurie Wolfley. A longtime member of the One Book, One Region Committee, Laurie teaches English here at Avery Point. She also coordinates the Global Cafe, a campus learning community that provides opportunities for students, faculty, and staff to examine real-world issues that span the disciplines and affect us all. When we heard her describe her personal connection to our book, we knew she was the right person to tell you about our 2022 One Book selection. Laurie.
Thank you so much. So no surprise, Being Human by Judith Heumann is the book choice of the year. Yes, we're thrilled. Before I tell you a little bit about my story, though, I would like to offer an opening from Christine Wenzel, who is Interim Executive Director of the Center for Students with Disabilities here at UConn. Anne-Marie Seifert, Director of UConn, Avery Point, had intended to speak, but at the last minute she wasn't able to be here, so I am sharing their messages. Christine sends to you, "I'm sorry I am unable to be there in person today, but just wanted to take this opportunity to highlight this exceptional program and this important topic. I am a firm believer that books unite people in ways that spoken communication cannot and open us up to conversations we might not otherwise have. A Hindu Indian monk by the name of Paramahansa Yogananda said it best when he said, "Those who are socially inclined will find a new power to help humanity through the lessons of books written by noble and gifted people." Judith Heumann is one of those noble and gifted people. Her passion, persistence, grit, and advocacy have changed the course of the disability rights movement in our country, and she has been instrumental in creating real change. Judith's work consistently reminds us that our minds and will are more powerful than any body we might be in. The mission of the Center with Students with Disabilities at UConn is to provide a comprehensively accessible university experience where all students have the same access to programs, opportunities, and activities as all others. Part of this work is to ensure that the intersectionality of disability with our many identities is a central part of our conversations about diversity issues and inclusivity. As Heumann has said, disability is just one part of her identity, but she is so many other things. With examples like her to guide us, we strive to do our part to ensure access, equity, and acceptance for the disability community. So thank you to Christine and to our Avery Point student. Appreciate your help very much. So my own story, my own relationship to this book began when I started reading it, which was only a few weeks ago. I had been involved in some of the programming and said, okay, I really need to read this book. And the moment I started reading it, I was shocked by the parallels between Judith Heumann's life and my own mother's life. My mother was a toddler when she was struck by polio. She wore heavy braces on her legs, used crutches, ended up in a wheelchair often, but she raised 4 children and she was a strong advocate. A proponent of social justice. She had all my sisters and me burning our training bras in the kitchen sink in the 70s. She decided that being a parent wasn't enough for her. She wanted to be a teacher, so she worked hard to make going back to school work for her, and Connecticut College is the school that she chose to attend. She got her Master of Arts in teaching there. She was a strong admirer of FDR, and in fact, we have a letter from FDR's secretary. My mother wrote saying, "Can I meet him?" And we got a letter back from the secretary. So lots of connections. This is such an important issue. This is one that so many of us have lived with our whole lives and others have no idea about. So I'm really grateful to be able to introduce this program. Thank you so much. And we have a clip to show. Oh, space bar. Mm-hmm.
Change never happens at the pace we think it should. It happens over years. of people joining together, strategizing, sharing, and pulling all the levers they possibly can. Gradually, excruciatingly slowly, things start to happen. And then suddenly, seemingly out of the blue, something will tip.
So thank you for that. It was a lovely reflection, especially the number of reflections that we've heard from folks who have been part of the selection about the ways in which this book has touched them and has made them, has provoked thought and has provoked togetherness. I really think that we're in for a treat as we all move forward in this exploration together. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the kickoff event. Professor Jennifer Domino Rudolph is an associate professor of sociology at Connecticut College. She specializes in Latinx studies. Her teaching and research interests include Latinx cultural studies, race and ethnicity, and disability studies. Professor Domino Rudolph is the author of 2 books and several articles and book chapters on Latino cultural production, Latinx masculinities, and disabilities. Her most recent book, Baseball as Mediated Latinidad, Race, Masculinity, Nationalism, and Performances of Identity, has recently been released by the Ohio State University Press as part of the Global Latino Americas series. Her academic and personal journey as a disabled person has led her to teach, research, and publish in disability studies. Her first publication is a sociology textbook chapter in Getting Real about inequality, titled When I Think of Disability, I Think of a White Guy in a Wheelchair: The Social Construction of Disability and the Intersections with Race, Class, Gender, and Sexuality. Her next research project looks at the intersection of Latinx masculinities and disability and Latinx men's lived experiences. And this fall, she will be teaching a new course, Disability and Society. Please join me in welcoming Professor Domino Rudolph.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you to all of the people that organized this amazing event and such an important and dear to me topic. And special shout outs to Andrea Holbrook for the ride. And also a very special thank you to Jessica Kohler, who read a draft and provided really valuable feedback on the presentation that I am about to give, which I have decided to title Disability Matters on Being Human and Being Human. Right there was our catch-22. Because the country was so inaccessible, disabled people had a hard time getting out and doing things which made us invisible. So we were easy to discount and ignore. Until institutions were forced to accommodate us, we would remain locked out and invisible. As long as we were locked out and invisible, no one would see our true force and would dismiss us. That's a quote from Judith Heumann. Yay, technology. And thank you also for my media assistance as well. These words from Being Human, an unrepentant memoir of a disability rights activist, capture the lived experience and call to action for Judith Heumann. Imagine being told that your child should be institutionalized because they would be a burden, or being told that you cannot attend school because you are a fire hazard, or that you cannot be a teacher because you use a wheelchair. These are just a few experiences of disability and discrimination mentioned by Judith Heumann in her memoir. A child of German Jewish immigrants who settled in Brooklyn, New York, she contracted polio in 1949 at age 2 and began to use a wheelchair for mobility as a result. Her life story and trajectory of disability intersect with various other aspects of identity and family history as the granddaughter of Holocaust victims and the daughter of immigrant parents. Her memoir gives much needed voice to discrimination, challenges, activism, and everyday experiences of living and advocating for and with disability. Indeed, Heumann pushes us to think about and learn about disabilities within the context of race, class, gender, and historical context. So what does disability mean? We can think of disabilities from the perspective of a medical model and a social model. Medical perspectives stress biological factors or attributes that the medical industry seeks to cure, or at least treat as conditions that must be fixed. Whereas social perspectives recognize that disabilities are defined and negotiated, at least in part, by the societies that individuals live in. Many people who identify as disabled find the medical model problematic because they feel that that model ignores parts of their humanity, in that it treats them as people who must be fixed and in some ways are deficient as compared to other people. Indeed, Heumann has observed that as a child, she came to understand that the world thought she was sick, quote. Many members of the deaf community, for example, a community with a very strong sense of identity, see some medical interventions around deafness, such as certain types of implants, as a way of trying to eradicate a key part of who they are as deaf people. The social model, on the other hand, purports that social institutions, such as the legal system, define ability and disability and shape experiences of disabilities. For example, I identify as disabled due to a visual impairment. Uncorrected, my vision is 20/200, which is defined as legally blind in the US. Perfect vision is defined as 20/20. The visual world, such as signage and transportation, is designed for people with perfect or near perfect vision. In addition to visible disabilities such as physical impairments that require assistive aids such as wheelchairs, there are also invisible disabilities, which are disabilities that sometimes go undetected, such as autism, ADHD, OCD, and other types of neurodivergence. Having grown up with a neurodivergent, OCD-diagnosed, and probably also autistic father, born around the same time as Judith Heumann, and living with a physical disability myself, I see the ways that different types of disabilities impact our daily lives within the context of the time we are living in, and often go unnoticed or are dismissed. This makes stories like Judith Heumann so important, as they serve as invitations and exhortations for us to talk about and recognize how we may act as allies for disabled communities and individuals. Without the activism and advocacy of Judith Heumann, we would not have the legal and social supports that now exist for people with disabilities, as she has fought tirelessly as an activist, advocate, and policymaker under multiple presidential administrations. She has also participated in the disability rights movement, including a sit-in at the Federal Building in San Francisco. In 1977, a group of 75 disabled protesters occupied the building for 25 days, risking their health and creating community by making sure that everyone had their medical needs met, supported by the Black Panthers until the signing of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Section 504 protects the rights of people with disabilities to participate in federally funded programs. It was the governing disability rights legislation until the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. In order to understand the impact of disabilities, I'd like to share some information about disabilities within the US population. According to the 2019 US Census and American Communities Survey, the following information is available around disability. 12.3% of the US population is disabled. 38.9% of adults 18 to 64 with disabilities are employed, as compared to 78.6% of those without disabilities. Median earnings of year-round employed adults 16 and over with disabilities is $40,360 compared to $48,406 for those without disabilities. 25.9% of people with disabilities live in poverty, compared with 11.4% of those without disabilities. Among 25 to 34-year-olds, 16.1% of disabled people have a bachelor's degree, as compared to 39.2% of those without disabilities. 12.7% of women and 12.4% of men are disabled. Native Americans have the highest rate of disability, followed by African Americans, whites, Latinxes, and Asians. Let's consider disabilities within the context of public education. So what has changed since Heumann's experiences with the New York City public school system? I'll share my own experiences in the 1980s, as well as some information from my sister's years teaching early childhood special education in the Chicago metropolitan area in the present. But for the tenacity of her parents in the 1950s, Judith Heumann would likely have been denied a public education. It is likely that her immigrant parents, themselves orphans of Jewish German parents killed in the Holocaust, channeled these experiences of oppression and discrimination in their fight for their daughter's education. Heumann and other children with disabilities in New York City in the 1950s did not receive an equal education. She describes her early education as a teacher visiting the Heumann home for 2.5 hours a week, and also a school for students with disabilities where little education took place because educators did not think that children with disabilities could learn. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, mandating the provision of a free and appropriate education for all children with disabilities, did not exist until 1975. Parent advocacy was and is extremely important to the education of children with disabilities. When I was a child in the late 1970s and early 1980s, my supports were governed by an individual education plan, which ensured that I had pull-out vision therapy in school and accommodations for assignments as needed. My mother met with the team, including my teacher, the school nurse, and a team of administrators every year to ensure that my needs were met. In one of these early meetings, the school nurse stated, with no credible evidence to back it up, that I was probably cognitively impaired as well as visually impaired and should not be in a classroom with neurotypical peers. My mother, also a registered nurse, who would rather eat glass than engage in conflict, it took a lot for her to do this, said that there was no evidence in my academic progress thus far that I was cognitively impaired, and that she must have missed the class in nursing school where the school nurse had learned that visual and cognitive impairments were the same thing. Intimidated by my mother's education level, professional status as a nurse, and no doubt by her credibility as a white woman, the school nurse retracted her statement and agreed that the current vision therapy was sufficient. Race, class, and education level matter in these conversations. My sister, who teaches early childhood special education in a south suburb of Chicago, where 99% of the student population is eligible for free school meals in the state of Illinois, and is mostly Black American and Latinx, has told me that as a teacher in these meetings, she has seen children not get services that they need. In Illinois, classroom teachers write goals for students but cannot mandate specific services for special education, as that is under the purview of district representatives. Many parents are not aware of the services available to their children, and school districts provide little information for them, and even less in languages other than English. Parents often assume that the district representative is an advocate for their child, though that is not always the case. Navigating the State of Illinois Department of Education website requires reliable internet access through a confusing labyrinth of information. In one case, a Mexican immigrant mother approached my sister after one such meeting and said that she felt intimidated by the administrators at the meeting and by the incomplete Spanish interpreting, telling my sister that in Mexico, the type of services that would benefit her autistic son were not widely available, so she did not know what to ask for. My sister has also observed cases where the largely white middle-class staff at meetings with parents minimize or dismiss the concerns of Black and Latinx parents, especially young parents. In some cases, these are families negotiating multi-generational poverty and disabilities where parents themselves would benefit from a knowledgeable advocate to work with them to address the needs of their children. Though classroom education experiences has improved since the 1950s, we still have a long way to go to achieve educational equity and equality for students with disabilities. Starting with the physical spaces of classrooms and buildings, the Americans with Disabilities Act requires accessibility measures in new construction since its passing, but older buildings are not always subject to these laws. For example, some of the buildings at Connecticut College where I teach are not accessible as they have no elevator or ramp. I can recall a semester when a student with cerebral palsy could not come to my office hours in my inaccessible building. I met with her in the Student Center in an accessible but less private setting. With regard to services for students with disabilities, the program that provided the vision therapy where a specialist came to my school and worked with me was cut by the state of Illinois several years ago. My sister informs me that due to cuts in educational funding in the state of Illinois, students must have profound developmental or delays or disabilities to receive services that used to be available to students with moderate disabilities. School staffing levels are also inadequate often, and the COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated this issue. Parents must hold their school districts accountable for their children's educational progress to make sure that their children are receiving the services they need. I want to emphasize that teachers are overwhelmingly dedicated and want to provide the best education they can for all of their students, but budget and restrictive educational policies, which often inadequately address and attend to children with disabilities, limit what they can do. While the education system described above outlines challenges that render equality for people with disabilities a goal yet to be realized, I would like now to turn to where we see advocacy, activism, and the type of change that Judith Heumann continues to work toward as a disability activist and policymaker. She has served as Assistant Secretary of Education for Special Education and Rehabilitation Services from 1993 to 2001, and Special Advisor for International Disability Rights from 2010 to 2017, among other roles. The sustained work of Heumann and others in the disability activist movement has birthed Sins Invalid. Sins Invalid is a people of color-led activist performance group which seeks to use performance inspired by members' experiences to educate and empower a public committed to equity and equality for people with disabilities of all races, classes, and genders by centering experiences of people of color. Their work combines disability history with civil rights advocacy models, grounded in providing practical guidance for inclusion of people with disabilities, culminating in the publication of a disability justice primer. Now more than ever in history, there's a significant conversation and public engagement around disabilities and in public events, social media, and among public figures who use their literal and metaphorical voices to spread awareness of disability issues. The inauguration of Joseph R. Biden, who has publicly spoken of having a stutter, foregrounded disability. It featured firefighter Andrea Hall leading the Pledge of Allegiance in both American Sign Language and spoken language, as well as youth poet laureate Amanda Gorman, inspired in part to become a poet by an audio processing disorder and a speech impediment. From a disability standpoint, this was the most inclusive presidential inauguration in US history. Via social media, content creators are launching and creating more and more websites, hashtags, and TikToks featuring an ethnically, racially, and gender diverse group of people talking about how they live as people with disabilities. Social media blew up recently over an incident involving the use of ableist language, the word spaz, in a song by rapper Lizzo, which the rapper subsequently changed. According to Lizzo, quote, "It's been brought to my attention that there is a harmful word in my new song, Girls. Let me make one thing clear. I never want to promote derogatory language. As a fat black woman in America, I've had many hateful words used against me, so I understand the power words can have, whether intentionally or in my case, unintentionally. I'm proud to say that there is a new version of Girls with a lyric change. This is a result of me listening and taking action. As an influential artist, I'm dedicated to being a part of the change I've been waiting to see in the world," end quote. Disability rights activist Judith Heumann helped to create a world where artists like Lizzo have the awareness and the tools to publicly recognize when they miss the mark of disability equality and correct it. So what can temporarily able-bodied people, that's the term that disability studies use to describe people without disabilities, what can temporarily able-bodied allies do to support people with disabilities? Judith Heumann underscores the idea that if we live long enough, we will likely develop illness or age-related disabilities. I would like to end with an image and a few suggestions for able-bodied allies. Heumann had to sue the New York City public school system to get a teaching license after completing her teacher certification, having been referred to as a fire hazard and banned from school as a child. We see the struggle come full circle in this image of a teacher posted to social media after the Uvalde, Texas school shooting at Robb Elementary. The teacher was having a conversation with her students about protocol in the event of an active shooter in their school. The teacher tells her students, quote, "Being in a wheelchair, I will not be able to protect you the way an able-bodied teacher will. And if there's a chance for you to escape, I want you to go. I don't want you to worry about me. Your safety is my top priority." Slowly, quietly, as the words I had said sunk in, another student raised their hand. She said, "Mrs. Schimmoller, we already talked about it. If anything happens, we are going to carry you out." End quote. While I do not wish to minimize the impact of a school shooting, we can learn a lot about disability allyship from these students. Based on the experiences mentioned above and the example of these students, Lizzo, and the Biden inauguration, here are a few suggestions for able-bodied allies. 1, ask people with disabilities what you can do to support them. 2, include people with disabilities and be mindful of their needs when planning events. 3, listen and provide a safe space for people with disabilities to express what they want or need to say, and believe them. Do not require them to disclose more than they choose to. And finally, you will make unintentioned ableist mistakes. So acknowledge when you do, learn from them, and change your behavior going forward. I hope that Judith Heumann's story and the stories I have shared here give us all the tools to be allies. Thank you so much.
Don't run away.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Chris Bradley. I'm with the Mystic and Noank Library, and as with Betty Ann, have been with One Book for 20 years. I have 3 jobs tonight, and the first one is to see if any of you have any questions of Professor Rudolph. Well, I guess you're safe. You can safely retire. Thank you so much. It's so inspiring. The second thing I get to do are some thank yous. The One Book, One Region Committee is comprised of librarians in southeastern Connecticut and members of the faculty and staff of Conn College. If you don't mind, would you please just stand up and give us a wave? There are so many people who work so hard, come on, to put this together. Carla got the tablecloths, Ann brought the ice, Joanne brought the drinks, Betty Ann, yeah, that's it, come on. Remember when Lowell Weicker said he wanted, during Watergate, he wanted to have his partisan moment? So I just wanted to have my library moment. We also have non-librarians to thank, and one is right here, Sean Greeley, who's live streaming this presentation. It will be available on Groton Public Television, and he's also helped us out with other technical needs, as he always does. Thank you, Sean. And we have Kelsey from Bank Square Books. She's taken a seat in the back, but we always appreciate that partnership. And the third thing I get to do is announce One Book, One Region events that are coming up. And I hope that many of you will be able to come back for these events. The next one is September 8th, a showing of Crip Camp at Mystic Luxury Cinema with a plan for a free book distribution thanks to the Rotary Clubs of Southeastern Connecticut. So this movie, Crip Camp, is referred to in Judith's book, and she is actually in the movie. And she describes Crip Camp as the first time she felt she was really among people who understood, and it's very inspiring when she talks about it. And we have a member of our staff who is confined to a wheelchair, and he recommended the movie as well. And we're grateful to Mystic Cinema for giving us a very good price on it. So please enjoy. September 15th, through the Groton Public Library, Kevin Booker Jr. will lead a virtual community conversation on disability awareness. And if any of you have ever been to something with Kevin Booker, he'll do a fine job, there's no doubt. about that. Then the big event, September 22nd, definitely mark your calendars. There will be a presentation by Judith Heumann at Connecticut College's recently renovated Palmer Auditorium. So that's where we'll all be for that. And then finally, we are working on 2 human libraries, which some of you may have heard of, where you check out a person who acts as a book to talk to learn more about who they are. And so given the subject of the book, one of the things that impressed me, that she talked about how many different kinds of disabilities there are and how different they are one from another. So we are going to try to put one together September 30th at Con and one October 1st at Groton, at the Groton Thrive 55. We having a little problem with Chris Johnson, who's looked into this, the bureaucracy of the human library. So, you know, she submitted our application. We'll hope for the best. But again, thank all of you for being part of this and for enjoying the book. And we look forward to a wonderful summer. Thank you. Excuse me, Joanne is reminding me that we have food left over, so please help yourselves.